In the third MCQ, this is a QA question whereby we are supposed to use the observation from each of the reaction to find out what are possible cation and anion ions. The first experiment is the addition of dilute sulfuric acid that sees us producing a white precipitate for W but not for X. Now this suggests that W might have contained cation that give us an insoluble precipitate with sulfate that originated from sulfuric acid. We're going to use the shortcut of little brown cow as a reminder of the cations that when combined with sulfate actually give us an insoluble salt, and that will include lead 2+, barium 2+, as well as calcium 2+. And X should have none of that. So based on the first experiment, we know that B or C could have been the potential answer because of the presence of lead suggested in W. In the second experiment, we're adding dilute nitric acid and following on by barium nitrate. Now this itself is actually a test for sulfate. And should there be a positive test itself that sulfate is present, we should be observing a white precipitate. Now, although this is not the important part of the question, I do want to remind all of you that the acid portion contributed by nitrate is important because if there is no effervescence, it suggests that there is the absence of carbonate, which could otherwise be contaminating the solution to give you both a precipitate as well as an effervescence. So only truly when a precipitate is formed with no effervescence, we can then conclude that sulfate is the only thing that is present. And you do see that a white precipitate is formed in X. So on the second experiment itself, I'll say that X must have contained the sulfate and ion. And the white precipitate actually comes off with the formula of barium sulfate. So based on this, I'll say that for X itself, A, B, C, and D could not have been eliminated yet because all contains the anion sulfate. The next experiment here sees us using aqueous ammonia. And for W, a white precipitate is formed but is insoluble in excess. But for the case of X, the white PPT was formed but in excess it actually dissolved to form a colorless solution. In this case here, I'll recommend the usage of the shortcut Zoe, once, another, pancake with apricot. Now based off this shortcut, we know that Z firstly represented zinc 2+, once represented white precipitate, another who had represented aluminum 3+, P represented Pb2+, and all this is the observation in aqueous ammonia themselves. So for a white precipitate for both W and X, I'll say that W and X definitely would have contained zinc, aluminum, or lead itself. But for the case of W, please remember that it wanted something that was insoluble in excess. So going back to this shortcut itself, how do we actually employ things that's insoluble in excess is understanding that whatever that lies in front of the word white is considered to be soluble in excess. But whatever that lies behind the word white itself is considered to be insoluble in excess. So for W that wanted something that's insoluble in excess, we could have predicted that W could have either contained aluminum 3+ or Pb2+. For the case of X that actually dissolved in excess, I know that for X it should have been zinc 2+ instead. With that, I can eliminate B and D because zinc is present in both A and C, and furthermore, lead is further reiterated over here in the options of B and C. Now for the final setup here, which is the addition of sodium hydroxide, aluminum foil and warm, this is actually a test of nitrate. And should there be a positive test, there should actually be the production of ammonia, which actually caused your moist red litmus paper to turn blue. Now this itself was seen in W. It caused the moist red to turn blue, but not for X itself. Again, telling us that finally, for the case of W, it should have also contained the nitrate anion. Collectively, these are the facts for W. We know that it's definitely lead, and this is iterated in 2 experiments, and also nitrate must be present, telling us both B and C could have been the correct answer. But for the case of X itself, we know that sulfate has to be present as well as zinc has to be present. So the correct answer for this question is C, which is lead 2 nitrate for W and zinc sulfate for X.